hi, lovely people who survived until the end of the day, end of the conference, last talk for today. So I will try to be as long as possible to keep you in this building so that you cannot party today. So my talk, it has a very corny name. It's called 50 Shades of Decentralization. I will talk a bit more about why decentralization matters and why we are all oversimplifying this term and just saying, okay, this stuff is centralized or the stuff is decentralized. But before we go into it, a couple of minutes on Chainstack. We are the leading infrastructure provider. We're providing stuff like RPCs, data APIs, subgraphs, soon more like storage and other dev tools. We have some notable names as customers such as dapps like 1inch, others, wallets such as Trust Wallet, bridges, Oracle. So lots of interesting people we work with, and we're very happy about working with them, and they enjoy our on. Okay, so there's a very cool report from World Bank about decentralization and like definitions and different layers of decentralization. Quote from the report that says that thank you. It's a very complex concept, and it embraces a lot of different, topics and subjects, and that basically the decentralization and transfer of authority and responsibility for certain functions, and the main idea that it's complex, multifaceted concepts, and we tend to forget about this when we talk about software or like protocols, and we say, okay, this protocol is decentralized, this tool is centralized or decentralized. And forgetting about the fact that it's multi-layered, multifaceted. So this is, again, a piece of that report that basically, splits into different functions and like what type of decentralization we have. So in a world organization decentralization, there is like political decentralization, administrative, fiscal, market decentralization. They all work on the different levels, and we all need to look into each of these kind of functions separately. And then the most important idea that the balance of centralization and decentralization is important, because certain functions not necessarily needed to be decentralized in some cases as well. So I tried to map this this slide onto Web3 platforms in general, and like try to map them to our terms that we usually have. So basically political decentralization becomes governance, and we like talking about governance. There was just great talk just half an hour ago here about governance and like whether voting is a good type of decentralized governance or not. So this is important. Technology decentralization in our like Web3 platforms, there are a lot of different layers of things that can be either centralized or decentralized. Fiscal, like we should take care about incentives, whether all incentives are concentrated in one party hands, or it's properly decentralized, and there are like long tail of people who are incentivized to participate in a Web3 platform or protocol. And finally, there is market decentralization. Do you have like one player providing certain solution, or you have like 10 players or 100 players? Of course, competition is always better for everybody. So it's also important, like how many options do we have generally on the market. So because we are an infrastructure platform, we are providing APIs. I wanted to provide such breakdown on like what we how we basically separate different layers on a technological part in particular, and like break down into different layers of our technological stack, and show like what can be centralized, what can be distributed, what can be decentralized, and such, right? So it's of course like a little bit oversimplified view on the API stack that companies like Chainstack, Alchemy, Infura, QuickNode, Pocket Network, and many others have, and pretty much it's almost the same stack, but there are a lot of nuances on each layer. So this is an oversimplified representation. It all starts from application. If you're a developer, you use like Web3.js or Foundry or any other tools, and basically this is how you access the blockchain, right, for read and write. Then there is service gateway that you use to access. They are also called endpoints. So when you insert a URL in your tool, this is basically how you access the blockchain, right? Then there is middleware, and different providers, different vendors have different type of middleware. Some have caching, some don't have caching. All type of reverse proxies. There are like wide variety of them. Load balancing, no load balancing. So there are a lot of nuances after you actually access the gateway. So then there are blockchain nodes. There is certain degree of decentralization there as well, because there are multiple clients, for instance, for Ethereum, and it's important to know whether a vendor or provider is running one client or two clients or five clients or different, and switching between them, and like having the variety of, if one client goes down, can you like switch over to other one as well. Then there is lower level of protocols, like different like libraries and SDKs to build blockchain protocols like Tendermint, P2P. Then there is like traditional internet protocols like TCP/IP, DNS, and such. And finally, there is like compute and storage, and there are different types of platforms that you can choose, starting from like bare metal to cloud and others. And of course, there's a variety there, and also a certain degree of like how decentralized your stack with regards to the hardware, compute and storage in particular. So I tried to build a few case studies to show like the state of the art and like what's basically happening in the ecosystem, to show like what is decentralized, what is distributed, what is centralized. So let's take Infura as the most common example of a API provider in the space that everybody tend to hate nowadays because of certain things that they also have in the stack that are pretty centralized, right? And they are working on it, which is good news. They have Infura Decentralized initiative. And they are building a decentralized network of operators like Infura themselves, like us, and many other participants in the ecosystem to help basically reduce the centralization point. So what's bad about Infura today? Let's say so the red are pieces that are completely centralized, right? So let's say service gateways, they are basically owned by Infura, and they are hosted in the same cloud, which is AWS. Middleware is very proprietary, so it's not very interoperable. You cannot port it, it's not open source, so it's pretty decentralized. If, let's say, something happens with senior developers at Infura, maybe some people do not know how to operate this middleware and so on and so forth. It's pretty decentralized. Blockchain nodes, I don't think there is much variety of blockchain clients that they run. As far as I'm concerned, they run like Geth. And then compute and storage, again, it's pretty much like AWS hosted. So if AWS USC goes down, usually Infura goes down together with it as well. Another example is Chainstack. There is certain improvement there. It's not all green as you see. So let's say service gateways. We host in like 6 different cloud providers, 12 different data centers. So it's pretty diversified. It's definitely not decentralized because we still control all this infrastructure. Middleware, we try to be as compatible as possible with like the tooling and the node stack. So we try not to add extra middleware on top of the nodes. We try to provide like vanilla APIs that node expose. We try not to fork node software and let's say add more stuff on top of it. So we try to be as compatible as possible with regards to software running, which includes nodes, but also like the graph indexers or any other products that we build on top. For blockchain nodes, we run a bunch of clients for different services, including Geth, Ergo, Nethermind. We're looking into Wrath that is buzzing at this event as well, and they just released a bunch of alpha versions. That is pretty cool client as well. Compute and storage, again, we run like in different cloud and hosting providers, and we have a bunch of data centers that can be load balanced between each other as well. And one of the services that we released recently is Global Elastic Nodes, which is basically load balance nodes across all continents that you can access, and if something goes down, there will be an automatic fallback on other locations. Another example, Pocket Network. If somebody know what Pocket Network is, they basically try to pitch themselves as a decentralized API provider. The trick is that they are not decentralized API provider as of today, and it's important also to understand that. Having said that, they're working on further decentralization of the protocol. However, if you see in Twitter, then Pocket Network says, okay, we're decentralized. It's important to understand the nuances as well. So let's dig into it a bit. Basically, the idea of Pocket Network is that they have this concept of relay nodes that are basically servicing the requests on the network, as well as blockchain nodes of the Pocket protocol itself that is basically doing the relaying, right? So any participant in the network should run Pocket node as well as relay nodes to be able to service the protocol with API. And there are a lot of participants in the network, hence there are a lot of blockchain nodes of Pocket protocol as well as relay nodes that these participants plug into the core software so that they can service the network. So blockchain nodes pretty decentralized, I would say, because they basically run like thousands of different nodes by many different participants. Blockchain protocols are pretty decentralized. Compute and storage pretty decentralized because people are running on multiple different platforms, clouds. They even use other APIs as service providers like Chainstack or any other. So it's pretty diversified. Now the problem here is, and why is it not a truly decentralized API provider? Because the service gateway is today basically very centralized. And if you go and use Pocket, you will go to Pocket Portal. And Pocket Portal is something that is managed by Pocket Inc., which is basically a pretty centralized entity, which is managing the portal. And basically all the relays that you send to Pocket Network, which is on the back end is pretty decentralized, are going through one single entry point. So basically there is sort of, as of today, there is very small footprint on the highest levels of service gateways as well as middleware, because they're all centralized, not open source. And if the portal goes down, all the blockchain nodes are operating under the hood, but basically it's down because the portal doesn't work. They are having an initiative now to basically have multiple gateways hosted by multiple entities. Chainstack will be the first entity also to host a Pocket gateway so that the network will become more decentralized and more participants will host the gateways. But it's important to understand that at the moment, let's say, the network is not extremely decentralized from the top level, and we've seen quite a lot of downtime because managing these kind of gateways is not an easy endeavor as well. There are other considerations about centralization and decentralization of such services. Let's say my personal opinion that decentralized APIs are cool and they are good for baseline use cases. For instance, like for MetaMask, when customers of MetaMask, they don't have any particular custom requirements. It's pretty generic API, so I think it's perfect match. Like such networks like Pocket and like Infura decentralized network is amazing for this kind of use case. However, you have a lot of interesting custom use cases of different customers that want to do this or that. They want to have certain service in this location, that location. They want to host it in their own cloud. They want particular tracers to be enabled and so on and so forth. We as an API provider with 5 years experience, we've seen a lot of different requests. So what are the value-added tools, services you can provide? Do you provide also just nodes, or do you also provide some other things, like for instance in our cases like subgraphs or data APIs or storage is important because for customers they want to access all the dev tools ideally from one platform and not just have 10 different platforms with different tools. Customization is very important. All the advanced power users, they ultimately need some sort of customization, like custom timeouts for certain requests because they take too long, because they try to trace very complex transactions, and then you cannot really customize stuff on a decentralized network because it's, who do you go to customize it? Decentralized network API doesn't have a customer support by design because it's a decentralized network, so there's no customer support. And as we see, again, customer support is super important because ultimately we are not just all robots, talking to each other with ChatGPT, but we are people. We want to communicate to each other, and we want to have people answering our requests, and so on and so forth. Like for this, the best example I have is like internet, which is pretty decentralized by design, and like ISPs or like internet providers, and there are like tens of thousands of them across the world, and basically they are all providing you different access to internet, which is a decentralized network, and they all give you different pricing, they all give you different like SLAs, they all give you different type of support. You like the logo of the ISP, you don't like the logo ISP, you can choose, right? And ultimately get access to a decentralized network. So I think that's a good approach, the right approach. I can always call the guy from the technical support and say that my internet is slow, and I will get the response most of the times, and so on and so forth, right? So how flexible is the architecture? Let's say you build a decentralized network for RPCs, and now, okay, today RPC is sort of de facto standard for accessing blockchains, but what if like in 2 years there is a new thing that is like, I don't know, SQL API to the blockchains, right? And it becomes like the standard. So like how do you change your network for this new standard if you build your own network and like your old protocol to service like JSON RPC requests, for instance? That's a big question. Of course, you can build flexible architecture for that, but again, it's a very important point to consider. If you're centralized in a sense, or like what I call like more like distributed, then you can adopt much faster, right? And you can cater these changes like in probably weeks, and like protocol changes will take you like months or sometimes years, and so on. So there's certain benefit to keep things simple and centralized whenever you not ready like what will come next. SLA is important again, like for infrastructure services. This is kind of number one North Star metric, and like if your services are not reliable, people will not use it regardless like the other aspects of it like cost and such. So being reliable is very important. How do you like commit to reliability on a decentralized network? I think it's also very hard, because basically your network is operated by usually non-professional participants. So how do you basically commit to certain SLAs for your customers? What is the SLA agreement like? What if you break SLA? Like who will pay you credits or like cash back for the services that you didn't receive because the network was down, and so on and so forth? So a lot of important questions. And like what are the ways to pay for the services when we're dealing with like decentralized networks? Usually we have some examples already in place, like the Graph and Pocket Network and a bunch of others. It's pretty, because of the token appreciation, usually the payments should be made by tokens, either by staking tokens in some way or another, or like paying through like the actual token, and so on and so forth, which is usually pretty cumbersome for people. And of course, it's a solvable problem by just some auto conversion from like stable coins maybe, or like some payment gateways that will get your other currencies, or maybe even fiat, and then pay for the services in the decentralized networks. But people are lazy, that's just a fact, so they want to pay in the easiest way possible. So let's say for us, we support like fiat, credit cards, invoices, crypto. It's all self-service, so you can basically choose like what is the way for you for payment. It's kind of funny, but we have people paying in Dogecoin for APIs. I don't know why, but like people are really paying in Dogecoin, which is quite funny, I think. So there are a lot of interesting non-technical considerations of like these kind of services and platforms in Web3, and I think it's important. Again, I see a lot of value in like truly completely decentralized platforms, but I don't think they cover 100% of use cases in this ecosystem, which is pretty big and complex. So it's important to understand the nuances of like what is centralized, what is decentralized, and not just say, okay, this XYZ is centralized, XYZ is decentralized. That was my main message, to understand the nuances and to critically assess what people say, which also applies to all sorts of infrastructure like blockchains, centralized, decentralized sequencers, all this kind of stuff, to like Oracle systems, to bridges, and all this kind of stuff. So whenever people say, okay, XYZ is decentralized, it's better to, usually it's written in the docs, but nobody goes to the docs. So it's like, you can actually like figure out that all these layers, like in API, provider example, you can read all this usually in the docs, and it's pretty obvious, or you can like, trace using like command line, couple of command line commands, but people are again lazy, so nobody's doing this. So this kind of education, I think it's important to for people to realize like, okay, that there are more layers, and there are more considerations of just like centralization versus decentralization. Sorry, I couldn't take you for too long, so. Yes.
Oh, sorry. So you use a couple of times the words decentralized and distributed. So what is your definition of both?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think you can look at it from different perspectives, but my own understanding is that decentralized system is the one that is not controlled by an entity, and distributed system can be easily controlled by one entity, but the components of the system should not be concentrated in, let's say, one data center, or one developer should not know everything that's happening in the system. So basically that you have different, controls and like entities, not necessarily entities, but like different entities hosting your solution, for instance, and such. But the governance of this it can be completely centralized, but the components are distributed. So that's what I call distributed.
Hi. You said Infra is having like a new initiative, like bringing like a decentralized RPC network. How it compare with Pocket Network, because they are like competing in a way of bringing like two similar infra. No?
So in fact, there is even more competition now for this in this particular area. So there is Pocket Network, which is like an OG protocol, honestly pretty poorly designed, but the guys were like very brave to start doing it, and I feel a lot of respect, and we participated in Pocket from the early days, but the design is pretty bad. They're now improving it over time, but it took many years. Infura is trying to do this as well. It's not happening as fast as we would expect, so there's a lot of thinking in the process, and there's not that many people who are involved. There's another project called Lava Network, if you're keen to look into it. It's pretty cool as well. They are sort of the first project that took this like service gateway, like decentralization in consideration, because like the problem with Pocket, for instance, is that you access Pocket through the portal, which is centralized entry point. So what Lava does, which is interesting, I think, is that they say, okay, you can access our network through the centralized endpoint, but also, if you don't want, you can use our SDK. And our SDK will basically do the node selection for you, and it will happen on the client side. So I think that if we really need like decentralized APIs, RPCs, the endpoint selection should happen on the client side, because otherwise you will always hit some sort of host name or whatever, like IP, which is anyway hosted by somebody. So there are ways to do it today already, like libraries like Ethers.js. They have pretty cool like providers where you basically can have a consensus of nodes, and you can insert like 5 endpoints, and it will just compare the results from each endpoints. And if there's a quorum of like 2 out of 3, which is I think pretty cool, probably quite expensive if you run multiple providers and you do the same request to all of them. But you can do it if you want. You can already have some sort of decentralized RPC built in your DApp by using libraries like Ethers, for instance, that allow you to do this like fallback provider kind of thing. But I think in general, if you want to have a complete decentralized view, we should not hit the the endpoints, and we should rather like access the network through some SDK, which will be smart enough to select the endpoint for you, and this endpoint should be provided by multiple different node operators.
Any other question?
Thank you, guys.